The candlelight at our 10th anniversary dinner flickered against the crystal, distorting the reflection of the woman I thought I knew. I had just complimented Valerie on her blue dress, the one I bought specifically for tonight, when she set down her fork with deliberate precision. She looked me in the eye and delivered the script she had clearly rehearsed. After 10 years of marriage, my wife said, "I'm going back to my ex, and I'm taking half of everything." I smiled. The next day, her sister called me screaming, "You can't do this to her! We'll sue you." But in that moment, there was only silence. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, until the waiter arrived with our entries. He placed the sea bass in front of Valerie with a flourish, completely oblivious to the detonation that had just occurred. She stared at me, her green eyes wide and expectant, waiting for the explosion. She wanted me to beg, to scream, or to make a scene that would validate her narrative of victimhood. Instead, I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corner of my mouth. I saw her confusion ripple beneath her carefully applied foundation. "Did you hear me, Leonard?" she hissed, dropping the veneer of civility. "I'm going back to Troy. He was always the one." The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Troy was the college boyfriend, the unemployed personal trainer she had supposedly outgrown a decade ago. Now, apparently, he was her destiny. "I never really loved you," she added, twisting the knife. "You were just safe. You were stable. But I'm bored of stable. I want passion, and I'm done pretending." The cruelty was efficient, intended to draw blood. I looked at the untouched sea bass and then back to her defiance. A younger version of me might have shattered, but I had spent 17 years preparing for exactly this conversation. "Then you should leave tonight," I said, my voice terrifyingly level. "Go find your passion." I didn't wait for her rebuttal. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a stack of cash, dropping $180 onto the pristine white tablecloth. It was enough to cover the meal and a generous tip for the waiter who would have to deal with the aftermath. Valerie sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, the script she had written in her head crumbling against my refusal to participate. I stood up and buttoned my jacket, feeling a strange, cold lightness in my chest. "Goodbye, Valerie," I said, turning my back on 10 years of shared history. I walked through the crowded dining room, ignoring the inquisitive glances from neighboring tables. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the cool Chicago night air. The city sounds rushed in to fill the void she left behind. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scream in the car. I simply drove my Audi onto Lakeshore Drive, merging seamlessly with the traffic. The city lights blurred past, streaks of gold and red against the darkness, but my mind was already miles away. I wasn't grieving the loss of my wife. I was calculating the liquidation of an asset. As I drove, I mentally unlocked a steel door in my mind. It was time to activate the protocol I had designed for this exact scenario. The show was just beginning. My mind drifted back 17 years to a cramped cubicle in downtown Chicago. It was 2008, and I was a fresh industrial appraiser staring at windows that didn't open. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mirroring the anxiety in my gut. I wasn't anxious about my job, but about my brother, Brandon. He had called from a payphone because his wife cut his service. His voice sounded hollow. He was 40, broke, and sleeping on a couch after losing his home. Brandon had done everything right. He built a contracting firm from one truck into a fleet. He renovated a craftsman house for Rebecca. But when she left him for her pilates instructor, the judge didn't care about fidelity. Illinois was a no-fault state. They split everything. Half the business. Half the retirement. The house was sold to pay lawyers. Brandon looked at me later and said, "Don't ever trust fairness, Leo. Trust leverage." That sentence branded itself onto my brain. My cubicle neighbor was Adam, a forensic accountant specializing in high net worth divorces. He was mid-30s, twice divorced, and possessed eyes that saw numbers as weapons. He watched me spiraling over Brandon's situation and offered a lifeline. Romance is a biological trick. Adam told me, spinning a pen. Marriage is a merger. If you don't read the bylaws, you deserve the bankruptcy. He took me under his wing. We spent lunch breaks dissecting asset structures instead of sports. He taught me to hide in plain sight. That year, we developed the Never Again protocol. It wasn't just a prenup, it was a comprehensive lifestyle architecture. We designed liability entities, separate property classifications, and bank account structures showing access without ownership. Adam treated it like a game, but for me, it was survival. I swore I would never end up in a rental apartment like Brandon. I dated, sure, but I kept my finances locked in a vault. Then, 5 years later, I met Valerie at a barbecue. Valerie was vibrant, a graphic designer with a laugh that turned heads. She was chaotic in a way that balanced my rigidity. We talked for 4 hours that first night, and I fell hard. I pictured a life with her, holidays, children, the suburban dream. But every time I looked at her, I saw a potential adversary. The love was real, but the fear was older. I proposed after a year, but the ring came with a shadow. I needed the paperwork. I didn't frame it as a divorce plan. I used Adam's strategy. 2 years into the marriage, I claimed I was worried about client lawsuits. I said my industry was litigious, and we needed to shield our family assets. It protects us both. I lied, sliding the envelope across the counter. My heart hammered. If she read the clauses about separate property and waiving support, she would see the lack of trust. I held my breath, waiting for the anger that never came. Valerie didn't even open the folder. She was watching a reality show about housewives fighting in a restaurant. You and your paranoid paperwork. She laughed, rolling her eyes. She grabbed a pen from the junk drawer and flipped to the signature tabs. She signed every single page while glancing back at the television. She didn't ask a single question or call a lawyer. She just signed away her future rights to shut me up. That was in 2018. The ink dried before the commercial break ended. I returned to my home office, the silence of the empty house amplifying the buzzing of my phone. It was Thursday morning, not even 12 hours since the restaurant walkout. A process server knocked on the door at 8 sharp, handing me a manila envelope thick enough to strain the clasp. Angela wasn't wasting time. The cover letter bore her firm's letterhead, embossed and pretentious. She had filed emergency petitions for exclusive possession of the residence and temporary spousal support. I scanned the 32 pages of legal fiction Angela had drafted. She painted me as a financial predator who had systematically isolated Valerie from marital assets. The petition demanded immediate freezing of all accounts and a monthly support payment of $4,000. It was aggressive, designed to shock me into settlement talks before I could find my footing. I called Nathan, my lawyer, who picked up on the first ring. She's going nuclear. I told him, flipping a page. She wants me out by Friday. Nathan's voice was calm, the antithesis of Angela's hysteria. She was filing on an emergency basis because she claims Valerie has no access to funds. It's a standard play. I could hear him typing in the background. But she's operating on the assumption that you're just another husband who forgot to document things. Did she read the file I sent over? I looked at the clock. It was 9:15. Angela was likely just opening her email. Send it again, I said. Make sure she sees the signature. Nathan hit send on the email containing the Never Again protocol. It wasn't just a PDF. It was a shield forged in the fires of my brother's ruin. The document clearly outlined that all assets acquired before and during the marriage remained separate property, unless explicitly combined. It established that Valerie had waived spousal support in exchange for a lump sum. I waited, imagining Angela's face as she opened the attachment. The silence from her end lasted exactly 14 minutes. My phone rang, displaying Angela's number. I patched Nathan in on a conference line before answering. You son of a bitch, Angela screamed, her professionalism dissolving instantly. You tricked her. This is fraud. Nathan interjected smoothly, Good morning, Angela. I assume you're reviewing the postnuptial agreement signed by your client on October 14th, 2018. It's notarized and filed. Angela sputtered. She didn't know what she was signing. She thought it was liability protection for his business. This is void. Ignorance of the law isn't a defense, especially when the text is plain English, Nathan replied. Angela's breathing was heavy on the line. She realized the 50-50 split she promised Valerie was evaporating. She had no independent counsel, Angela argued, her voice dropping an octave. He stood over her while she signed. That is duress. That is coercion. You can't uphold a contract signed under threat. I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk. She was watching Bravo, Angela. Not trembling in fear. Angela went quiet. Then played her next card. It doesn't matter. We're amending the petition. This level of control, hiding assets in complex structures she couldn't understand. That is textbook financial abuse. She paused for effect. I am going to depose you, Leonard. I am going to drag every receipt you have into the light. If you think a piece of paper protects you from a judge seeing a controlling narcissist, you're wrong. See you in court. The line went dead, leaving a dial tone. The hearing was supposed to be a formality. I walked into Judge Morrison's courtroom with Nathan, feeling the weight of the postnup in my briefcase like a loaded gun. Angela sat at the opposing table, looking surprisingly smug for someone who had just been caught lying about duress. She didn't have the frantic energy of our phone call. Instead, she had a yellow highlighter and a stack of bank statements. Nathan noticed it too. She found something? He whispered, his confidence faltering slightly. Angela stood up, bypassing the emotional arguments entirely. Your Honor, while Mr. Crawford's postnuptial agreement claims separate property, his actions say otherwise. She held up a statement from 2019, zoomed in on a transaction line. For 7 years, the mortgage on the marital residence was paid via autopay from account 4738. A joint checking account. The heir left the room. My stomach turned over. I knew that account. It was the household expense fund fed by my business distributions. Nathan leaned over, his voice a harsh whisper. That is co-mingling, Leonard. Textbook. I tried to argue, keeping my voice low. It was my money funding the account. She never contributed a dime. Nathan shook his head, looking defeated. It doesn't matter. Once your separate funds hit a joint account, they become marital property. You used marital funds to pay down a separate debt. The math was simple and brutal. By saving 10 minutes on autopay setup, I had opened the door. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses, looking at the spreadsheet Angela provided. Mrs. Crawford has a legitimate equitable claim to the appreciation of the home during this period, she ruled. Angela smirked, scribbling notes. She is entitled to 20 to 40% of the current equity. I did the mental calculation instantly. The house had appreciated significantly. That clerical error was going to cost me nearly $70,000. My perfect armor had a crack, and Angela was prying it open. Angela wasn't finished. Your Honor, my client has no other residence. Mr. Crawford has ample resources to secure temporary housing. The judge nodded, seemingly annoyed by my wealth in contrast to Valerie's portrayed destitution. I am granting temporary exclusive possession of the marital residence to Mrs. Crawford, Morrison stated, banging the gavel. Mr. Crawford, you have 48 hours to vacate. I sat there, stunned. I was being kicked out of the house I bought, paid for, and legally owned. Sunday evening was a blur of cardboard boxes and suppressed rage. I packed only the essentials, leaving the furniture and the memories behind. The house felt alien now, contaminated by the legal ruling. I loaded my car, checking my watch. It was exactly 7:55. I refused to give Angela grounds for a contempt motion by staying a minute late. I walked out the front door, leaving my keys on the console table next to a photo of our wedding. As I backed out of the driveway, a beat-up Honda Civic pulled up to the curb. My headlights washed over the driver. It was Troy. He wasn't just visiting. The back seat was piled high with duffel bags and a guitar case. Valerie opened the front door, wearing my bathrobe, and waved him in. They weren't just taking my equity. They were moving into my sanctuary before the engine of my car had even cooled. The war had just escalated. I met Ruby at a coffee shop near her dorm. The air heavy with the scent of burnt espresso and the dull roar of exam stress. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red, clutching a cardboard cup like a lifeline against the chaos. Valerie had clearly gotten to her first. "Mom says you planned this for years," Ruby said, her voice trembling with accusation. "She says you stole everything and left her with nothing." It hurt to hear the distortion of reality coming from my daughter. I didn't raise my voice or defend myself with emotional platitudes. I simply unlocked my phone and opened the Dropbox app. "I shared a folder with you called Family Financial Structure when you turned 18. I said, sliding the device across the scratched wooden table. "I told you to read it before you graduated. Open it now." Ruby hesitated, looking at the glowing screen like it was a bomb waiting to detonate. She tapped the folder, revealing 7 years of PDF files organized by date. She scrolled through the documents, her frown deepening as she read the bold headers. She saw the postnuptial agreement, the notary stamps, and the bank restructuring forms from 2019. "She signed all of this," Ruby whispered, zooming in on her mother's loopy, distinct signature. "There are even photos of her laughing with the notary." The narrative of the helpless, coerced victim began to fracture under the weight of documented evidence. "She knew," I said softly, watching the realization hit her. "She just didn't care enough to read it." "You are a finance major, Ruby," I said, leaning in closer over the table. "If you want the truth, don't listen to me or your mother. Follow the money." I pointed to the Venmo app on her own phone. "Check her public feed going back 8 months. See who she was paying." Ruby unlocked her phone, her fingers moving with the speed of a digital native. She scrolled past the recent pity payments from friends and stopped at September. Her face went pale as the pattern emerged from the digital noise. "Troy," she read aloud. "It started with small amounts for consulting in August, then escalated to dinner and weekend supplies by December. She was sending him hundreds of dollars while complaining to me about how strict you were with the budget," Ruby said, her voice hardening. The betrayal wasn't just marital anymore, it was maternal. She had been lied to about the victimhood. Ruby didn't stop there. She logged into the family cloud account she still had access to, pulling up the iMessage logs. "She texted Aunt Angela in January," Ruby said, reading from the screen. "Wait until the bonus hits in March before dropping the bomb." The color drained from her face completely. The divorce wasn't a sudden emotional break. It was a calculated financial strike timed to harvest my annual performance bonus. It was cold-blooded theft masked as heartbreak. Ruby looked up at me, the tears gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger that mirrored my own. She tapped a few buttons, airdropping the screenshots and the timeline directly to my phone. "I am changing my emergency contact info with the university today," she said, standing up and slinging her bag over her shoulder. "And I am blocking her number." She didn't hug me, but she didn't need to. We were allies now, armed with the undeniable truth. Angela filed an emergency motion for discovery sanctions on Tuesday, accusing me of perjury. She claimed I had concealed a business brokerage account holding $40,000, framing it as a malicious attempt to starve Valerie. I sat in Nathan's office, reading her filing with a dark amusement, flipping to page 7 of my initial financial declaration. There it was, listed clearly in black and white. Business Reserve Account 8821. Angela hadn't bothered to read the discovery she demanded. She was too busy performing outrage to check the facts. Judge Morrison stared at Angela over the rim of her glasses, the silence in the courtroom thick enough to choke on. "Ms. Chen," the judge said, her voice dangerously low. "You accused the respondent of perjury in a public filing without reviewing your own case file. Angela tried to stammer an excuse about the volume of documents, but Morrison cut her off. I am sanctioning you $750 for this frivolous motion. You will also pay Mr. Crawford's legal fees for today's appearance. Angela's face turned a violent shade of crimson. The humiliation in court didn't stop Angela. It just made her desperate during my deposition 2 days later. She sat across the mahogany table, eyes narrowed, trying to trap me into admitting I coerced Valerie. You controlled every penny, she said, the court reporter's keys clacking like gunfire. Valerie was terrified to ask for money. That's why she signed. I leaned back, looking at the camera. Actually, I said, sliding a new exhibit across the table. She wasn't terrified. She was planning how to spend my bonus. Nathan introduced the Ruby timeline into the record, labeling it Exhibit D. It contained the screenshots of Valerie's texts to Angela from January, scheming to wait for my payout before leaving. It also showed the Venmo logs to Troy for consulting fees that predated the separation by 6 months. Angela stopped writing. She stared at the text where she herself had advised Valerie to cry on cue. The narrative of the abused wife evaporated instantly. Angela realized her own texts were now evidence in a fraud investigation. The pressure wave hit Troy the next afternoon at his gym. We had him served with a subpoena for a third-party deposition, demanding his presence and his text history. Nathan made sure the process server handed it to him in the middle of the weight room floor. Troy read the demand for his communications regarding the affair and the financial gifts. He wasn't a fighter. He was a parasite who thrived on easy hosts. The prospect of legal fees and public exposure terrified him more than losing Valerie. Valerie called me that night, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You ruined his life, she yelled, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs. Troy broke up with me. He kicked me out of the car. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Troy had abandoned her the second the check cleared or the trouble started, exactly as the data predicted he would. He didn't love you, Valerie, I said quietly. He loved the lifestyle you promised him. The collapse of the romantic fantasy triggered the collapse of the legal strategy. Angela realized that Valerie was now a liability with no boyfriend, no credibility, and no access to the liquid cash they had hoped to extract. The contingency fee she was banking on was disappearing behind a wall of sanctions and defense evidence. Angela was bleeding billable hours on a losing case, and her reputation in the family law community was taking a beating. She looked at the math, and like any bad investor, she decided to cut her losses. 3 days later, a notification from the court clerk pinged my email inbox. Angela had filed a motion to withdraw as counsel, citing irreconcilable differences regarding case strategy. It was legal code for my client is broke and lying to me. Valerie was now alone in the house she had temporarily stolen, without a lawyer, without a lover, and without a plan. The silence from the opposing side was sudden and absolute. The aggressive motion stopped. The daily emails demanding documents ceased. The war machine had run out of fuel. I drove past the house that Friday just to see if the lights were on. The lawn was overgrown, the grass reclaiming the edges of the driveway I used to meticulously edge. It looked neglected, a physical manifestation of Valerie's inability to maintain the things she took. I saw her shadow move past the living room window, pacing back and forth. She was trapped in the victory she had fought for, realizing that possession of the house meant nothing without the funds to keep the lights on. Nathan called me while I was idling at the stop sign down the street. Her new lawyer just reached out, he said, sounding tired but relieved. His name is Rick. He's a settlement mill guy. He wants to know if the offer is still on the table. I looked at the house one last time, then put the car in gear. Tell him the price just went down, I said. She pays her own legal fees now. I drove away, ready to close the ledger. The mediation center smelled faintly of stale coffee and lemon polish, a neutral scent designed for ending a life. I sat at the far end of the long conference table, watching dust motes dance in the single shaft of sunlight hitting the mahogany. Nathan arranged his files with military precision, the sharp snap of the binder rings the only sound in the room. We had been waiting for 20 minutes past the start time. This delay was likely a power move, or perhaps just simple disorganization. Either way, it was the final play where emotional debt converted into hard currency. When the heavy door finally opened, Valerie didn't make an entrance. She drifted in like a pale ghost. She wore jeans and a loose gray sweater, a stark contrast to the sharp designer armor she used to wear to our dinners. Her eyes were dull, scanning the room without locking onto anything, avoiding my gaze entirely. Behind her trailed Rick, her new attorney, who looked like he had slept in his suit. He carried a single thin manila folder, looking pathetic compared to Nathan's fortress of documentation. Valerie pulled out a chair and sat, shrinking into herself. Rick cleared his throat, shuffling a few loose papers that looked suspiciously like unpaid bills rather than legal briefs. "We are here to resolve this amicably," he started, his voice lacking any real conviction or bite. "My client is willing to accept the equitable distribution of the home equity, but we need to discuss the spousal support again." He was trying to reopen a door that Angela had already welded shut with her incompetence. I looked at Valerie, waiting for her to speak up, to fight for her entitlement. She just stared at the table, picking at a loose thread. Nathan didn't even look up from his spreadsheet, treating Rick's request like background noise. Spousal support was permanently waived in the 2018 postnuptial agreement. He stated flatly, "That document has been validated by Judge Morrison. We are here to discuss the co-mingling error regarding the mortgage payments, and nothing else." He slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a check for $68,000. This represents the equity appreciation plus the reimbursement for the kitchen renovation. It is a final offer. The number hung in the air, a specific price tag on 10 years. Valerie finally looked at the check, her eyes widening slightly at the number on the line. It was a lot of money to someone broke, but nothing compared to the millions she had convinced herself she deserved. "Leonard," she whispered, her voice cracking with strain. "I have debts. Angela's fees are huge, and the credit cards." She looked at me then, really looked at me, with eyes that used to make me melt. "I can't start over with just this. Please? You have so much." It was a plea to the husband I used to be. I didn't blink, nor did I feel the tug of sympathy I once expected. "You had a credit card with a $20,000 limit, Valerie," I said, my voice steady. "You maxed it out on hotels and dinners for sure. You have the car. You have your jewelry." I pointed to the check sitting between us. "This covers the legal liability I incurred by using the wrong checking account. It is not a charity donation." I leaned forward slightly. "Sign it, or we go to trial, and I will seek legal fees for the delay." Rick leaned in, whispering urgently into Valerie's ear, likely explaining the cold reality of her position. I could hear snippets of his advice. Sanctions? No liquidity? Best we can do. He knew they had absolutely no leverage left. Going to trial would cost her another $10,000 she didn't have, only to likely get the exact same result. Valerie listened, her shoulders sagging with every word he spoke. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a gray resignation. She picked up the pen, her hand trembling. It wasn't the defiant signature from 2018. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was louder than a scream in the quiet room. She signed 3 copies, pushing them away as if they were burning hot. Nathan inspected each signature, nodded to me, and slid the check toward her. She took it, folding it quickly and shoving it into her purse without looking at me. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice hollow. "We're done," Nathan confirmed, closing his binder with a definitive snap. "The divorce decree will be mailed to you." She stood up, looking lost, a stranger holding a check. After they left, Nathan told me the rest of the news regarding her sister. Angela hadn't just lost this case, she was currently losing her practice. Word gets around fast. Nathan said, packing up his laptop. The sanctions for filing frivolous motions spooked her other clients. 3 of them fired her this week. It seemed the legal community had an immune system, and Angela was being rejected like a virus. She had bet her career on breaking my contract, and the recoil had shattered her professional standing. It was a grim bonus, a side effect of her hubris. I walked out of the building and into the bustling Chicago afternoon sunlight. The air felt sharper, cleaner than it had in months. I checked my bank app on my phone. The withdrawal was pending, but the bulk of my accounts, the retirement, the business assets, the investments, remained untouched. I had lost a house and a wife, but I had kept my future. I hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of my new condo in Lincoln Park. As we merged into traffic, I realized I wasn't just driving home. I was driving into a life that was mine. It was a crisp May afternoon when Ruby graduated, the kind of day that felt earned. I stood in her new apartment, straightening the collar of her gown while she adjusted her cap. She looked like victory. But the peace shattered when she handed me an envelope she'd found slid under her door. It wasn't a graduation card. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with Angela's handwriting scrawled on the front. "She's back," Ruby said, her voice tight with fear. "Mom was outside the building again last night." I opened the envelope, sliding out a single sheet of legal stationery and a stack of old photos. The note was brief and malicious. "Angela says we have options regarding the grandmother trust. This isn't over." Valerie was desperate. She had burned through her settlement, alienated her family, and was now weaponizing nostalgia to get to her daughter's inheritance. It was a low blow, targeting the money my mother left specifically for Ruby. They thought they found a new vein to bleed, assuming I had left it exposed. Ruby sat on the edge of her sofa, twisting her hands in her lap. "Can they actually touch it?" she asked, looking young and terrified. "Aunt Angela says parental rights give Mom access until I am 25. I sat down beside her, placing the threatening note on the coffee table. "Angela is betting on a standard trust structure," I explained calmly. "She thinks I set it up like a normal savings account." I pulled out my phone and dialed Nathan. It was time to close the final gate. "Nathan, file the petition for the restraining order," I said the moment he answered. "Use the note as evidence of harassment." I hung up and looked at Ruby. "The trust doesn't belong to me, and it certainly doesn't belong to your mother. When Adam and I drafted it 6 years ago, we appointed an institutional trustee." I tapped the table. "J.P. Morgan holds the keys, not us. The bylaws explicitly ban any distribution to parents or guardians. It is an iron box that only opens for you." Relief washed over Ruby's face, followed immediately by a dark realization. "They wasted the filing fees," she whispered. Angela had pushed Valerie into a fight against a wall of reinforced concrete. My paranoia, the very trait Valerie had mocked for a decade, was the only thing standing between Ruby and financial ruin. I hadn't built these walls to keep people out. I had built them to keep my family safe. The never again protocol wasn't about hate. It was an act of aggressive, foresight-driven love. We walked out to the balcony, looking over the Chicago skyline. My phone buzzed with a confirmation from Nathan. The temporary restraining order was already in motion. Valerie and Angela had played their final card, and it was a joker. I put my arm around my daughter, watching the sun glint off the lake. "It's over, Ruby," I promised. And for the first time in 17 years, since the day my brother sat at that card table, I finally believed it. The file was closed.